Right, we are sticking with the story for now about the fact that Daniel Khalife, who has been on the run from the police for 4 days, having absconded from Wandsworth prison, has now been caught in neighbouring Chiswick. Well, he's managed to hide out for 4 days, but he didn't really get very far, did he? This is the former soldier who had been held in Wandsworth, a Category B prison on terrorism charges. Actually, he hadn't been sentenced. He wasn't serving time, so to speak, but awaiting his trial. But he did manage to get work as a chef and nip out of the kitchen on a catering van and, well, enjoyed 4 days of fresh air. But he's afraid he's back in custody now. And his 5 minutes of fame has now been granted to him. Probably won't last very long. Some of your thoughts on this. So this is Ash of Hayward in Manchester, who's a Gulf War veteran, and says, great news, well done to Met Terror Police. What would be even greater credits to them is the £20,000 reward money was seen by the public to be given out. I mean, who should be getting it? I don't know. And Cassie in Lincoln, this is fascinating, actually, because Cassie is a former prisoner. And she says, as a former prisoner, 2006, it is not unusual for remand prisoners to work in the kitchens. All delivery trucks are searched on entry to the prison and, crucially, should be watched by officers during the delivery process, plus live CCTV monitoring of vehicles. Most crucial of all, a roll count, a head count, takes place of kitchen prisoners before the vehicle can leave that area. A final check is made at the main gate of the inside, on top and underneath the vehicle. I don't find it unusual, she says, for a non-violent prisoner to be held on remand in a Category B prison. Cassie in Lincoln, they're providing us interesting and brilliant depth and detail. Dan from Kent says, afternoon, Alex. All right, Dan. It was a spontaneous, mad moment. This is what he thinks Khalife was doing, not some sort of hardened terrorist being helped to escape. He also points out those tail lift lorries are quite easy to tuck yourself in, and the security simply couldn't be bothered to check. Well, was he aided and abetted? Which, if he was, you'd kind of think he might have then been aided and abetted on the outside too, which doesn't seem to have happened. Or was it just super lax security? And then Robert in Northampton says, why all the fuss about one jailbreaker when there are thousands of far more dangerous people living the good life on benefits and being watched by security forces? Indeed, I'm sure there are plenty of people. I actually once read a dossier done by the Henry Jackson Society on quite how many people are tracked by the police when it comes to... everyone's favourite former Bobby. Peter, I've got you in the flesh. This is fantastic, and how wonderful to have you here. I mean, very interesting, reading what Cassie in Lincoln there as a former prisoner is saying, that, you know, if you're just a remand prisoner, then it's not unusual to get the prison work. But clearly something's gone on here if he's managed to get underneath a vehicle and get out, and it's somehow taken people 4 days to find him.
Such brilliant contributions from viewers and listeners.
Yeah, I know.
That you read out, and Cassie, yeah. Because, of course, a remand prisoner is that they are somebody who has been charged, but they've not been tried, so they are utterly unconvicted of any crime. And, of course, it's innocent until proven guilty in the UK, the cornerstone of our justice system. So he was clearly afforded a level of trust in that he was allowed to work in the kitchen. But what we need to do now, bearing in mind what I've just said, because there is a trial scheduled for November, and hopefully that trial will now go ahead, we all need to be, and you just have been, measured in what we say. Because, and this applies to the public as well, because what we don't want to do is be named and accused at a trial of saying something that would jeopardise the chances of this man receiving a fair trial. Yeah. A fair trial. So the evidence can be heard and a jury can arrive at their verdicts. Fair and truthful verdicts, we hope. So, yeah, we've all got to exercise a degree of caution. But, of course, it's been the story for the last 4 days. And I give credit to the Metropolitan Police, which they're probably saying makes a change, because I'm often sticking my size 12s up their rear end when they get things wrong or they employ criminals and all of that. But well done. And as one of your viewers or listeners alluded to, that £20,000 reward, the public deserve a lot of credit here, because I'm getting word that the police were swamped with phone calls.
Yeah, hundreds of calls
about sightings of him. So fair play to each and every person that made that call. Not each and every one of those callers is going to get 20 grand.
Are you surprised? Now we've found out that he's in Chiswick, which is basically the neighbourhood next door, and we don't know how, we do vaguely know how far that van got to, and he hopped off at sort of main intersection still in Wandsworth, didn't he? That he managed to evade capture for 4 days, given the calls, given the sightings, given the amount of CCTV. You know, they got a sighting of him, so they knew, well, this is the sort of area we should be looking in. I mean, there were huge operations going on down in places like Dover, where they had to do extra checks of people leaving the country, but he hadn't really got far at all, had he? Does that surprise you? It then took the police 4 days to find him, or is that about right?
Well, their first major breakthrough only came yesterday, when they confirmed that a member of the public had seen him coming from underneath the van on that huge roundabout at Wandsworth. And of course, what that did was give them the first crumbs to follow in terms of CCTV, because what they would do is map each potential direction that he could have walked from that roundabout, and then debrief CCTV systems along those routes. And then, of course, they can work out which one he must have taken. If there's no sightings there, pursue the other ones, and at some point, clearly they've gone, that's him. They've followed the trail invariably. And each and every time they've done that and had a sighting, what they've done is they've reeled him in. They've shortened that head start that he had on them. And of course today, quite clearly, they had him hemmed in the Chiswick area. He was completely boxed in. They threw everything at it. Yeah. Absolutely every resource they could.
I mean, it's over 100 police officers, wasn't it, who were tasked with this manhunt, and the police even going to residents in Chiswick and saying, you know, can we check the boots of your cars? Can we check your ID? Things like that. I mean, you know, it was a huge amount of resource, wasn't it? And do you think that's, you know, that is proportionate, essentially?
Well, it had to be. Because imagine what the worst case scenario would have been. And that would have been if this man, who is facing a charge in relation to the Official Secrets Act and also a counter-terrorism charge in relation to possibly obtaining evidence for the benefit of an enemy, and that enemy is Iran. The worst case scenario would have been if, in a few days' time, he had popped up at a press conference in Tehran, sitting next to the Supreme Leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran. That would have been catastrophic. The nation would have been the laughing stock of the free world, and many ministers' heads would have rolled. Of that, you could be guaranteed.
Now, I want to bring in something that Matthew said earlier, just before the break, because Matthew was we're talking about Wandsworth, Category B prison, and he said that you know, half of the inmates there basically are foreign nationals awaiting deportation. I mean, you were a Bobby on the beat. What is your experience of doing those, you know, basically arresting people, hunting people down, and what proportion of people do you think these days are from foreign countries who are the perpetrators of crime?
And I was also a detective, I hasten to add.
You were, yeah.
You know,
Let's not get that one.
Don't downgrade.
That nestles proudly on my CV, if you don't mind.
And so it should. We're just sad you've retired. Get back to work.
But here's one of the actual complications for the police of today that wasn't anywhere near the concern that it was when I was pounding the beat or being a detective. And that is simply the volume of foreign nationals in the country. When we'd stop someone in a car, it was a pretty rare occurrence that they would be a non-UK citizen, and we could, generally speaking, fairly swiftly establish who they were, where they lived. Now, can you imagine the job that faces the police when they stop, talk to, engage with, possibly search so many people from so many different corners of the earth that are now in the UK? In that regard, the police have my sympathy, because it must be a much, much more difficult task than it was when I pounded the beat.
I mean, Matthew, how important do you think it is that this incident, as embarrassing as it has been for particularly Wandsworth Prison, has shone a light on potentially how insecure our prison estates are, how overcrowded they are, and actually actually, the fact that we are basically a few days away from some sort of disaster because we just can't seem to get enough prison places for prisoners and not enough security to keep them there.
Absolutely. I mean, look, thank goodness, as you say, Peter, that he was found, and we're not entirely a global laughingstock, because we've actually been able to recapture him. Because the whole thing about this story is it was adding to that sense of national malaise that nothing worked in the country, that we couldn't get anything right. And I think that it's important that actually, to be credit to the Met, as you say, that they've caught him in a relatively short time, and he's now back under lock and key. In terms of prison policy, I think yes, it's going to shine a light on how insecure our prisons are, how the fact that because we send more people to prison than pretty much any other European country, politicians are always talking about prison numbers. They want to send more people to prison. They want to be seen to be tough. Maybe it's better that we step back and we actually ask, are our prisons secure for those people who should be locked up? But in order to do that, do we need to look at other sentences for people on shorter sentences to free up resources to make sure that those who we really care about being locked up and where we know it's vital that they are properly secure? Because we can't do everything. Resources are limited. And within the prison budget, it can't just keep going up and up and up.
I mean, Peter, what's your view on this? Because there's a lot of debate now, of course, when you have a story like this, it expands into all areas of discussion. A lot of people saying, well, actually, the fact that this government has been very keen on lengthening sentences could well have contributed to this backlog in the prison service, where people, essentially have got more than the overcapacity. They've got more prisoners than they can potentially handle. And this could potentially have led to this. Is it right that perhaps, the next government looks at this and says, oh, maybe we should shorten those sentences again? Or do you think that actually a longer sentence is a deterrent?
Crime is rampant. It's everywhere. And I don't care if anybody says to me, well, there's been a decrease in crime. And you're going to hear politicians saying crime is down. Well, quite frankly, so much crime is simply not reported. In the last 2 days, I've bought 2 cups of coffee, right, in 2 separate coffee stores, and I've engaged with the staff. In the first shop, it was the coffee shop, it was because we saw somebody come in and just blatantly shoplift and walk out without paying. That started the conversation, and the man who was serving me the coffee told me about a story not long ago where a man pulled a knife on him because he refused to give him a free cup of coffee. I go to another coffee shop early this morning, start engaging conversation with the staff, and they tell me that they were threatened by somebody with a knife just a matter of days ago. Now, OK, we're in central London.
And all that's unreported.
In central London, well, the second one was reported. The first one wasn't. So there you have, with my little anecdotal story here, 50% of crime not reported. Many people have become so disillusioned because they don't get an investigation, they don't get a visit from a police officer. All they get is a crime reference number, which is barely worth the paper it's written on.
It's just for insurance.
It's just a proper insurance website, isn't it, basically?
Yeah. I mean, this has been a fascinating 4 days. It has developed, of course, into a political argument, but it seems nobody has got answers for the big questions being asked. Is what we need longer sentences, more police, more prisons? I mean, it's all going to cost money.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Or, to be honest, and say we can't lock everybody up, but we're going to have different sorts of sentences, or we're going to look at things like decriminalising more aspects of drugs. I'm not saying that that's necessarily the way to go, but we've got to be realistic about what the police can do. And after that, Peter, you know better than any of us, the cuts that the police experienced in the early part in the 2010s. I know that more police officers are being recruited now, but hollowing out the police force, as you say, in many parts of the country, they simply don't respond to such a high percentage of crimes.
If we had all day, I would sit here and perhaps surprise you as I argue my case for the complete legalisation and regulation of all drugs. OK? It's a different subject, and many people might
But
go,
no politician would be brave enough to say that, will they?
Well, some are.
Yes, a few, but none of the leaders.
A very prominent one, and others. People might say, an old school cop, I like him, saying legalise and regulate, and thereby rip that industry, which is the 4th biggest industry in the world, rip it from the vice-like grip of organised crime.
Cabals,
but,
exactly.
that which is top of my wish list is probably not going to happen in my lifetime, but believe you me, it will happen. The drug law reform movement is unstoppable, and it will happen. But it's complex.
Yeah.
And I can hear people shouting at the radio now and, you know, wanting to throw things at your telly. Please don't, they're expensive tellies. But I would happily explain all of that at some point. And if we did that, it would free up a huge amount of prison capacity. Actually, there's a lot of people out there that deserve to be in prison. Long sentences often work much better than short sentences because prisoners can work on themselves. The prison regime can help them, and they work on themselves. And by that, I mean recognise their offending, recognise the harm, kind of show some contrition and regret, and actually come out willing and able and trained to contribute,
education as well,
contribute to society.
Now, it's an important message here from Dave in Poole, who's picked up on what you said at the start of the interview, actually, where he said, yes, in reference to the escaped prisoner, he managed to escape prison, but as the law stands, he is still an innocent man until proven guilty in a court of law. Yeah, well said. Many times in the past, there have been cases where the accused have been hung out to dry by the British press before any verdict of guilty or not guilty has been made. For example, Sir Cliff Richard, of course, we'll remember when the BBC had their helicopter over his house. So this guy, Daniel, is still an innocent man, and we don't know the full details behind all the charges. That is very important, and as you were saying, Peter, very important to not prejudice a trial. He gets a fair hearing, but then if he is guilty, that he is, you know, banged up, because, you know, we don't want him to get off if he is guilty on, you know, us messing up as the media and as the public by ruining that trial.
What great credit to have listeners and viewers who are as sharp and as bright and as sensible
Got some
as
great
people
ones
like
today.
Dave.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
It's what an honour to be able to broadcast to these people.